And so now I want to talk to you about my grandpa Arthur. And this was a man who I had an opportunity to have quite a good relationship with. And I believe he passed away when I was in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s. I think I was 20 or 21. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot from my grandpa about hard work. I learned a lot about how to advocate for yourself in life, as well as some other different aspects of kind of more pragmatic and practical lessons of life. And I also got to see a side of him which was vulnerability in his own way, and then also the barriers in many ways. And I think that a lot of that had to do with the way that he was brought up. So as I shared before, my grandpa lied about his age so that he could join the Navy. I mean, just think about that, right? You lied about and mind you, this was a time, right, where the United States was in war. Things were hectic in the world, right? And he lied about his age so that he could go into the Navy. And as I reflect on that, there's a picture of him. And I don't know if anybody has ever seen those old time photos where, we get dressed up in an old time photo and it's taken in black and white. There was a picture of my grandfather in his Navy uniform. And I literally looked to my dad and I said, "Dad, when did you have this old time photo taken with a Navy outfit on?" That wasn't my dad, that was my grandpa. And I mean, he was like a spitting image of my dad. But I share that to say that I can only imagine the life that my grandfather must have had growing up, that by the age of 15, he wanted to lie about his age to join the Navy, very well knowing that he was likely going to be in the middle of a war zone very soon. My grandpa very rarely said, "I love you." He very rarely would give me a hug or give other people a hug. My grandma, he would be the guy that would like just recycle the birthday card. He would write in there, "Happy birthday" to my grandma, and then afterwards say, "No, give me the card so I can give it to you again next year." He was not a man who displayed much of vulnerability or connection with his emotions for a very, very large portion of his life. And he and I would very often go to breakfast at the Red Oak together, which was his favorite restaurant to go get breakfast at. We grew up, my grandfather and my father and myself, we all grew up blue collar, very middle class, maybe even lower middle class. Particularly my grandfather worked in construction. And so there was periods of time where he would not work. He would work a lot in the summertime and then obviously not as much in the wintertime. And so he would have to save up his money, maybe buy extra food, extra meat in the summertime when money was good. So in the wintertime, when the money slowed down, they would still have meat to eat, obviously meat being more expensive. And he loved coupons. I'll never forget it. He loved coupons. And in many ways, that was beautiful because it taught me the value of how to save money, how to get a good deal. But there was also another aspect to it, which was this scarcity mindset of you got to watch out, things could be taken from you, you might lose things. And, I had to learn in my life that there's that healthy balance between, okay, it's good to use coupons, it's good to save money, it's good to take advantage of deals, and at the same time to live in the mindset of, oh my gosh, something's going to go wrong, or what's going to go wrong, or I need to be prepared for the worst of the worst because it's going to happen. That's not a healthy mental framework to live in. And of course, that's not so much about the purpose of the book, Big Boys Do Cry, but I share it with you because I noticed that from my father, and then very often in my life, I noticed that. And so just like that program as it relates to the scarcity mindset surrounding money or food or whatever it is that we want to call it, that same mindset or framework can also come up as it relates to relationships. And I saw that in the way that my grandfather and my dad would interact sometimes, quite harsh at times, quite shut down, and other times, like best friends. But there was definitely a friction at times. There was definitely kind of some unexpressed thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and definitely a real lack of vulnerability. And I think that this mostly occurred with my grandfather very close to, and maybe even all the way up to his death. And on the day that my grandfather died, we got a call. My stepmom and my dad and myself were at our house, and my uncle was visiting from out of town because my grandfather was not doing well. And we got a call from my grandmother saying, Art's not doing good. You need to get over here. And we didn't know it, but he had already passed away even when my grandmother had called to have us come over. So we get there, and my grandfather is there. I'll never forget 21 Norman Road in Shenango Bridge, New York. We get there, and he's slumped over on the couch, and he had passed away. That was the second time in my life that I saw my father cry. And I remember to this day exactly what happened. My grandfather is sitting on one end of the couch. He's slumped over. He's passed away. My dad is sitting on the other end of the couch, kind of in the middle. And I'm sitting on the recliner, my grandfather's favorite recliner, kind of on the other side of the wall. And I remember just sitting there on the recliner, and I was just staring at him. Just staring at him. And I hadn't done my own process of healing as it relates to death, because at this point in time I had still not embarked on the journey of healing from the death of my mother and unborn sister. And so I'm just kind of there. I mean, I guess you could say I was numb, but I was so captivated by the profound words that I heard my father saying to my grandfather. Now, my grandpa's passed away. He's on the other side now. And my dad is just sitting there weeping. I mean, I saw my dad cry twice, maybe 3 times in my life, but I'd never seen my father cry this way, weeping uncontrollably. And just expressing how much, he loved my grandpa, how much, there was more time, more things that he wanted to do with him. And my dad just saying, like, you're my best friend, you can't be gone. And I just remember thinking, wow, all these times that I saw my dad and grandfather have their tiffs and not get along, and now here he is, just so vulnerably sharing all of this with him, and at least in a way that I had never seen him express that to my grandfather before. And he's gone, he's dead. He's, I believe that he will hear that on the other side, but there is no sense of reconnection that can come from that now that he has passed on. And that was a very profound and impactful moment for me. And I don't think I realized at the time the gravity of what I was learning, but I certainly recognize it now in the power of, gosh, if my grandfather was a little bit more vulnerable with my dad, And if my dad was a little bit more vulnerable with my grandfather, you know, would my dad still have been saying those things? I'm sure he would have been saying how much he loved him and all of this, right? But would he still have been saying all those things as it relates to, you know, this unfinished expression of emotions? And we have an opportunity, and it's one of the biggest reasons that I wrote the book, Big Boys Do Cry, is because, you know, I believe that that was the most I ever heard my father speak from his heart to my grandfather. Because he allowed himself to cry. Maybe became so overwhelmed with emotions, whatever those mental and emotional blocks were from being able to cry, they were so overwhelmed that they just came down. But in any event, it was the most vulnerable I had ever seen my dad communicate with my grandfather, and he had since passed on. And I realize how important it is to be vulnerable. That moment, now that I look back and I process it now, it became apparent to me why it's so important for us as men to be vulnerable, to be connected to our emotions, and to, in a healthy way, express those emotions, because there will be a day at some point in time where we're not going to be able to express those thoughts, feelings, and emotions to the ones we love, because we're not going to be here or they're not going to be here. And I would invite you to really reflect on, gosh, if this person that I love, mom, dad, wife, girlfriend, child, whoever it may be, to really, really reflect on, hey, what is one vulnerable thing that I would really like to share with this individual? Not because we want to live in some morbid sense of, oh my gosh, a catastrophe could happen, right? But maybe that's the catalyst to get you into tapping back into that vulnerability, tapping into that sense of, wow, if this is the last thing that I could say to the person, what would I want that to be? Maybe that could be the shift or the impetus, right? To get you into your heart, to get you connected into your emotions, and to have that vulnerable communication with the person that you love. Because I promise you, as I have said so much, when we become vulnerable and we communicate from that vulnerable place, life gets really good. And our relationships become deeper, stronger, more beautiful, and more meaningful.